A cold wind moved across the empty land as Samuel Riker rode slowly toward the old Anderson ranch. The sky was turning deep blue, and the sun had already disappeared behind the distant hills. Samuel had been working all day on the far side of the valley, repairing fences for the local cattle association. He was tired, hungry, and covered in dust, but he kept riding because he had promised to check on Mrs. Clara Anderson, a widow who lived alone after her husband passed away 2 years earlier. People in town often spoke about her in low voices. Some said she was strong, others said she was struggling more than she admitted. Samuel did not listen to rumors. He simply believed someone should look after her, even if she never asked for it. When he reached her gate, he found it swinging in the wind. The ranch looked darker than usual, as if no lamps had been lit inside the house. He felt a small worry in his chest. Clara was always careful about things like her gate and her evening lights. Samuel dismounted, tied his horse, and walked up the path. Before he even reached the door, he heard the sound of something falling inside the house. He didn't knock. He pushed the door open gently and stepped inside. The air felt colder than it should have been, and the room was dim. A single candle burned on the small wooden table near the window, and its soft glow barely lit the space. He saw Clara kneeling beside a broken pot on the floor, holding her wrist in pain. "Ma'am, are you all right?" Samuel asked, rushing to her side. She looked up at him slowly, and her eyes carried a mix of surprise and relief. Clara Anderson was a woman who tried to look strong no matter the situation, but tonight her face told a different story. Her hair was loose, her clothes looked hurriedly thrown on, and her hands were shaking. "Samuel, I didn't expect anyone," she whispered. "I heard the noise," he said gently. "Let me help." He helped her sit on a chair, then checked her wrist. It was red and swelling. She had probably twisted it while trying to carry something heavy. Her eyes followed his movements, and for the first time in months, she allowed someone to see her fear. "I couldn't lift the water bucket from the well today," she said quietly. "And when I tried to cook, this happened." "You should have called for help," Samuel replied softly. She gave him a tired smile. "I don't like troubling people." "You're not troubling me," Samuel said. "You never have." For a moment, she didn't speak. She simply watched him as he cleaned the floor and set the broken pot aside. Her house looked different tonight. It felt emptier than usual, colder and more fragile. The shadows on the walls seemed to carry memories she had tried to bury. Samuel could sense the heaviness in the air, and he tried not to stare too long because he didn't want her to feel embarrassed. He checked the fireplace next. The wood inside was damp. No wonder the room felt so cold. She must have struggled to bring dry logs from the shed. "You haven't lit the fire today?" he asked. "I tried," she said, "but the wood was too heavy, and I felt too weak to try again." Without another word, Samuel put on his gloves, brought in dry logs from the shed, and arranged them neatly in the fireplace. Soon, a warm orange glow filled the room, pushing away the cold that had settled inside. Clara watched him with an expression that grew softer every minute. She was used to silence, used to loneliness, used to nights where she had no one to speak to. Seeing someone doing something for her without asking for anything in return made her feel something she couldn't easily name. "You must be tired," she said. "You worked all day, didn't you?" "I'm all right," Samuel answered. "I'm more worried about you." Her eyes lowered at that, and she pressed her hands together on her lap. After a few minutes, when the room warmed up, he turned to her again. "You haven't eaten yet, have you?" She shook her head. "I didn't have the strength to cook." Samuel walked to the kitchen area, found some potatoes, onions, and dried herbs, and began preparing a simple stew. Clara watched him the entire time, not because the act was unusual, but because no one had cooked for her since her husband passed away. The small sound of the knife on the cutting board, the steady movement of Samuel's hands, the low crackling of the fire. These simple sounds began to fill places in her heart she thought had grown numb. When he brought her a warm bowl, she took it with both hands, though her injured wrist trembled slightly. Samuel gently steadied the bowl for her. "Slowly," he said. "It's hot." She nodded, took a careful sip, and felt the warmth travel through her body. "This is the first warm meal I've had in days," she murmured. Samuel's brows pulled together. "Clara, why didn't you tell anyone you were struggling?" She looked away, her voice breaking slightly. "Because people already talk enough about widows. Some look at me with pity. Some say I'm weak. I didn't want to give them more reasons." "Then let them talk," Samuel said firmly. "You deserve better than carrying all this alone." His words made her eyes glisten, but she quickly wiped them and pretended it was the heat of the stew. After she finished eating, Samuel cleaned the dishes and checked the doors and windows to make sure everything was secure for the night. When he returned to the living room, he found Clara sitting near the fire, her hands stretched toward the warmth. But there was something else in her expression, something deeper. She seemed torn between needing comfort and fearing the weight of her own loneliness. "You don't have to stay long," she said softly. "I'm sure you want to go home?" "I'll stay until you feel better," Samuel replied. She looked at him for a long moment, her breath catching slightly. The room was filled with silence again, but this time it wasn't empty or cold. It was full of unsaid feelings, worries, memories, and a longing she had kept buried for too long. Finally, her voice trembled as she spoke. "Samuel, I don't want to be alone tonight." Her eyes met his, and in them he saw exhaustion, fear, and a quiet plea for simple human closeness. Not anything improper, not anything wild, just the comfort of knowing someone cared enough to sit beside her until morning. He stepped closer, and her hands reached out as if they were searching for something warm to hold on to. She gently tugged his hand, guiding him toward the only warm place in the house, the space near the fire beside her blanket. Her voice broke into a soft, emotional whisper. "Please, just stay." Samuel understood. She needed someone to sit with her, someone to remind her she wasn't forgotten, someone to ease the cold emptiness that had lived in her house since her husband's death. He nodded slowly. "I'm right here," he said. And for the first time in years, warmth filled the lonely widow's home, not just from the fire, but from the presence of someone who cared enough to stay when she needed it most. The fire burned brighter as the night deepened, and the small living room slowly filled with a warm glow. Samuel sat beside Clara on the floor near the hearth, keeping a careful distance so she would feel safe, but not alone. Outside, the wind pushed against the wooden walls, making soft creaking noises that blended with the crackling fire. Inside, the atmosphere felt calmer than it had in a long time. Clara wrapped her blanket tighter around herself, then glanced at Samuel as if making sure he hadn't suddenly changed his mind about staying. "You should tell me if you're too tired," she said gently. He shook his head. "I've had longer days than this. Being here, it feels right." A soft breath escaped her, almost like relief. She leaned back slightly, letting her head touch the wooden wall. Though the fire kept the room warm, she still looked pale, as if the quiet of the night was revealing how exhausted she truly was. Samuel watched her carefully, worried that the loneliness of the last 2 years had worn her down more than she admitted. "Has it been like this every night?" he asked. She hesitated. "Most nights, yes. Some are worse than others." "What about your friends from town, or the ladies at the church meetings?" Clara shook her head. "People try to be kind, but kindness feels different when it comes with pity." Everyone means well, but they don't understand how empty a house can feel when the person you built a life with is suddenly gone. Samuel lowered his eyes. I'm sorry. I didn't mean to make you remember painful things. It's all right, she whispered. Sometimes, remembering is all I have. The firelight reflected softly in her eyes, giving her a quiet strength even in her sadness. After a long moment, she spoke again. When my husband died, I tried to keep the ranch running. For months, I pushed myself harder than I should have. But you can only do so much alone. The animals grew thin, the land turned rough, and I turned tired. Her voice trembled. I didn't want to lose this place. It's the last piece of him I have. Samuel listened without interrupting. He knew loss. His own mother had died when he was young, leaving the house hollow for years. But Clara's loss felt deeper, more recent, more personal. Her entire world had changed, and she had been left to face it alone. You're stronger than you think, he said quietly. She gave a faint smile. Strength doesn't feel like strength when you cry at night with no one to hear you. Samuel swallowed hard at her honesty. He opened his mouth to say something, but she continued before he could speak. But tonight, it feels different. Having someone here, someone who doesn't want anything, who just cares enough to stay, it means more than you know. Samuel felt heat rise in his chest, not from the fire, but from the weight of her trust. He didn't move closer, but he let his hand rest near hers on the floor. Not touching, just close enough that she could feel his presence. A moment later, Clara shifted under her blanket. Her injured wrist still bothered her, and she winced. You're still hurting? He asked immediately. It's not as bad as before, she said, but it aches. May I look at it again? She nodded and offered her hand. Samuel took it gently, his touch soft and respectful. He examined the swelling, then wrapped the blanket edge around her arm to keep it warm. You'll need to rest it for a few days, he said. I'll come by and help with chores. Clara blinked in surprise. You don't have to. I want to, he said simply. Her lips parted, but she didn't argue. She only looked at him with an expression full of gratitude and something deeper that she was afraid to name. The room grew quieter as the fire settled into a steady rhythm. They sat together, breathing in the same warm air, letting the silence wrap around them like a shared comfort. Outside, the wind continued, but inside, it could not touch them. After a while, Clara spoke again, her voice softer than before. Samuel? Do people say anything about me in town? He hesitated. They say you're brave, that you're doing your best. Some wish they could help, but they don't know how. She gave a tired laugh. Some people say I should leave this ranch and start fresh somewhere else. What do you want? He asked. She looked into the fire, her eyes reflecting its glow. I want to keep living. I want to breathe without feeling like I'm failing. I want to sleep without fearing the silence around me. She paused. And I want to feel safe again. Samuel's voice was gentle but steady. You are safe tonight. Those words made her eyes soften completely. She slowly reached for his hand, not pulling him, not clinging, just laying her hand on top of his lightly, as if she was afraid he might slip away. Thank you, she whispered. He let her hand rest on his, giving her quiet reassurance. No rush, no pressure, nothing improper, just human warmth shared between two lonely souls. Minutes passed like this, slow and calm. The fire dimmed a little, shifting from bright flames to warm embers. The room became softer, filled with a low orange glow that made everything look gentler. Samuel noticed her eyelids getting heavy. You should rest. She shook her head slightly. Not yet. If I sleep, I wake up alone. You won't wake up alone tonight, he said. I'm not going anywhere. She took a shaky breath. I'm sorry if it sounds childish, but the nights scare me sometimes. Not because of ghosts or anything like that, but because of memories. They come back when everything is quiet. Then I'll stay, he repeated, as long as you need. Clara's eyes filled with emotion, not sadness exactly, more like relief after carrying a heavy load for too long. She shifted a little closer, her shoulder brushing his arm lightly. Samuel didn't move away. He let her lean into him, giving her room to rest while keeping his posture respectful and steady. She spoke again in a trembling whisper. Do you ever feel lonely? Samuel, more often than I admit. How do you deal with it? He thought for a moment. By working hard, by keeping busy. But sometimes it catches up with me too. She nodded slowly. It's strange how we live in the same valley, see the same sky, but we never tell each other these things. Maybe we should, he said. Another long silence followed. It wasn't uncomfortable. It felt like two people sitting beside each other after walking through different storms, finding shelter in the same warm place. As the firelight dimmed, Clara adjusted her blanket again. Samuel helped her tuck it around her shoulders. She looked up at him with soft eyes. You're a good man, Samuel. He shook his head. Just trying to do right. You're doing more than right. You're helping me feel human again. Her words struck him deeply. He didn't know what to say, so he simply stayed by her side, letting the moment settle warmly between them. When the clock on the wall ticked past midnight, Clara leaned her head gently against his upper arm. He froze for a moment, surprised, but then relaxed and let her rest there. Her breathing grew slower and calmer, as if she had finally found a quiet place to let go of her fear. Thank you, she whispered again, her eyes closing. Samuel stayed awake, watching the fire and listening to the soft sound of her breathing. He felt protective of her, not in a possessive way, but in a deeply human way. A desire to keep her safe, to make sure she never felt abandoned again. Outside, the wind finally calmed, and the moonlight shone faintly through the window. Inside, the widow who had spent too many nights alone finally felt peace. As she drifted into sleep, her hand slipped down and rested gently against his arm. Samuel covered her hand carefully with the edge of the blanket, making sure she stayed warm. He whispered so quietly that only the fire might have heard him. You're not alone anymore. Morning sunlight slowly entered the small living room, spreading across the wooden floor and touching the edge of the blanket where Clara slept. The fire had turned to soft gray ashes during the night, but the room still held a faint warmth from its last glow. Samuel opened his eyes slowly, realizing he had stayed awake longer than he planned. His back leaned against the wall, his arms folded loosely, and Clara was still resting gently against his arm, her head nestled near his shoulder, like she finally felt safe enough to sleep deeply. For a moment, he did not move. He watched her breathing softly, her face relaxed in a way he had never seen before. The lines of stress and loneliness that usually showed around her eyes were gone now. She looked peaceful, almost younger, as if the long night of safety had washed away years of silent fear. He didn't want to disturb her, but the small movement he made when stretching his legs caused her to stir. She blinked slowly, confusion passing over her face for a second as she adjusted to the morning light. Then she looked up, saw Samuel still sitting beside her, and her eyes softened. You stayed, she whispered. I told you I would, he answered gently. A warmth spread across her expression, and she sat up slowly, brushing her hair back from her face. She seemed embarrassed for a moment, as if realizing how close she had slept beside him. But Samuel kept his posture calm and respectful, easing any discomfort she felt. "You must be tired," she said. "A little," he replied with a small smile. "But I'm glad I was here." She pulled the blanket around her shoulders, and her injured wrist reminded her of the pain when she tried to adjust it. She winced again. "Let me take a look," Samuel said. She nodded and held out her hand. He touched her wrist carefully, checking the swelling. It had gone down slightly, but she still needed rest. "You shouldn't do any heavy work today," he said. "I'll take care of whatever needs doing around the ranch." Her eyes widened. "Samuel, you've already done so much." He shook his head. "You don't have to do everything alone anymore." Those simple words made something shift inside her, something she had locked away after her husband's passing. She looked down at her hands and whispered, "I forgot how it feels to have someone say that." Samuel stood and walked to the kitchen, wanting to start breakfast. Clara followed him with her eyes, feeling a mix of comfort and nervousness. She wasn't used to someone caring this much, but she didn't want him to leave either. He found some eggs and bread. The kitchen was neat but empty, as if she rarely cooked anything more than a simple meal for herself. When he cracked eggs into a pan, Clara pushed herself up and walked over. "You don't have to do everything," she said softly. "You already said that," he replied with a gentle grin. "But I'm still doing it." She smiled, an honest, heartfelt smile he hadn't seen before, and sat down while he cooked. The smell of warm breakfast filled the house, mixing with the morning sunlight. For a brief moment, the ranch felt like a home again, instead of a lonely shelter. While they ate, she looked at him thoughtfully. "You're a good man, Samuel," she said. "Why don't you have a family of your own yet?" He paused, his fork halfway to his mouth. "Life didn't work out that way, I guess. I've been busy working ranch jobs since I was a boy. I never stayed in one place long enough to think about settling down." She nodded slowly. "But you deserve more than a life of wandering." He shrugged. "Maybe. But I never found a reason to stay anywhere." He didn't look at her when he said it, but Clara felt something heavy settle in her chest. She wondered if she could ever be a reason for someone like him to stay, but she pushed the thought away, not wanting to misunderstand things. After breakfast, Samuel cleaned the dishes, then put on his coat to check the animals outside. Clara followed him to the door. "You should rest," he said firmly. "I can watch," she replied with a small laugh. "It's my ranch after all." He smiled at her stubbornness, but didn't argue. They walked outside together. The air was crisp and the ground glistened slightly from early morning dew. The chickens clucked from their coop, and the old barn stood tall at the edge of the property. Samuel checked the water troughs, refilled them, fed the animals, and stacked some wood near the house. Clara stood nearby, watching him work with calm, steady movements. He worked like a man who didn't rush, who didn't complain, who simply did what needed to be done, because it was right. "You make everything look easy," she said. Samuel shook his head. "It's only easy because I've done it my whole life." She stepped closer. "Samuel, thank you for all of this." He looked at her gently. "I told you. You don't have to thank me every time." She lowered her gaze, but her heart warmed in a way she couldn't hide. By midday, the sun was higher, and Samuel took a break by sitting on the porch steps. Clara brought him a cool cup of water, but when she tried to hand it to him, she accidentally dropped it because of her wrist. The cup fell to the ground, spilling water on the wood. "I'm sorry," she gasped, flinching as if she expected someone to yell at her. Samuel immediately stood up. "It's just water, Clara. It's all right." Her breathing was uneven and her eyes filled quickly. "I'm so tired of failing at small things. I can't even hold a cup properly." He stepped closer, wiping the spilled water with his boot. "You're not failing. You're healing. There's a difference." Her voice broke. Sometimes, I feel like I'm losing everything. Samuel gently reached out, not touching her face or holding her, but placing his hand lightly on her forearm. Just enough for moral support, nothing more. You're not losing everything, he said softly. You're finding your way again, and you don't have to find it alone. Clara closed her eyes for a moment, steadying herself. When she opened them, there was a quiet courage inside. Will you stay for lunch? She asked. He smiled. I'll stay as long as you need. They went inside, and he cooked a simple meal again. This time she helped by chopping soft vegetables with her good hand. They moved around each other naturally, like two people who had lived together for years instead of hours. After lunch, they sat near the window where sunlight warmed the table. Clara finally felt brave enough to ask what she had been holding inside. Samuel, are you going to leave after today? He looked at her, his expression thoughtful. Do you want me to leave? Her lips parted, but she didn't speak right away. She looked toward the window, watching the sunlight touch the fields her husband once planted. She whispered, I want someone to stay, someone who sees me, not just my sadness. Samuel felt something stir inside him, protective, gentle, but powerful. Then I'll stay for as long as you want me, he said. Her eyes glistened, but she didn't cry this time. Instead, she reached out and placed her hand over his. Carefully, almost like she was afraid he might pull away. But he didn't. He let her hold his hand, giving her the silent comfort she had been longing for. The rest of the afternoon passed quietly, filled with simple things, mending a loose door hinge, sweeping the porch, sharing stories about their past. They laughed softly at small memories. Samuel told her about his childhood, about his mother's singing voice, about the horse he lost in a storm. Clara told him about the early days of her marriage, the hopes she had when she first arrived at the ranch, the dreams she buried after her husband's passing. As the sun began to lower again, painting the sky with warm colors, Clara stood beside Samuel on the porch. Last night, I felt safe for the first time in a long time, she whispered. You're safe every moment I'm here, he replied. She turned to him, her eyes open and honest. Then please, don't leave tonight either. Samuel looked at her gently. He saw no improper intention in her request, only a quiet longing for comfort, security, and someone to keep the emptiness away. I won't leave, he said softly. A slow smile spread across her face, one filled with relief and a hope she thought she had lost forever. And as the sky darkened again, the lonely widow and the wandering cowboy stepped back inside the warm glow of the house, carrying with them the fragile beginnings of something neither had expected, something healing, gentle, and deeply human. The second night came softly, like a gentle blanket settling over the quiet ranch. The wind was calmer than the night before, and the house no longer felt heavy or frightening. The fire Samuel lit warmed the room with a steady orange glow, and Clara moved around the house without the same fear she had felt just 24 hours earlier. She still held her injured wrist carefully, but her steps were lighter, her eyes clearer. Samuel placed fresh logs in the fireplace, and Clara watched him from the table, her hands wrapped around a warm cup of tea he had made for her. She still felt shy about asking him to stay again, but when she looked at him, she didn't see judgment. She saw someone who genuinely cared. You've worked all day, she said softly. You should rest too. He smiled gently. I'm fine, and I want to be here. She took a small breath, then nodded. Deep inside, she felt a sense of comfort she hadn't known in years. Just knowing someone was near made the silence less painful. As the evening settled around them, they talked about small things, the weather, the condition of the cattle, the old apple tree growing near the barn, but soon the conversation grew deeper. "Samuel," she began, looking into the fire, "I wasn't always this frightened. I used to be strong. My husband and I built this place together with our own hands. We didn't have much, but we had hope." Samuel listened quietly. "When he died," she said, her voice tight, "the world became too big for me. The nights felt endless. Every sound scared me. I tried to hide it from everyone. I thought, if people saw my fear, they would think I was weak." "You're not weak," Samuel said firmly. "You survived something most people can't imagine." Clara looked at him, her eyes shining softly. "Maybe. But I never expected someone would walk into my fear and make it disappear, not even for one night." Samuel didn't know what to say at first. He only looked at her with a steady, sincere expression. "I didn't make it disappear," he said. "You just needed someone beside you, someone who truly cared. Anyone would be afraid alone." She smiled faintly. "Then thank you for being that someone." The fire crackled, filling the space between them with warmth and a growing sense of trust. Later, as the night deepened, Clara felt a sudden wave of tiredness. She didn't fight it. She crossed the room and sat closer to the fire. Samuel sat beside her, exactly like the night before, close enough for her to feel safe, but always respectful of her space. She leaned her head lightly against his upper arm again, just as she had done in the early morning. It felt natural now, familiar. Samuel adjusted the blanket around her shoulders, making sure she was warm. "Do you ever think about settling down?" she asked softly, half asleep already. Samuel smiled without looking away from the fire. "Sometimes, but I never had a reason to stay in one place." "And now," she whispered. He hesitated, not because he was unsure, but because the truth felt bigger than he expected. "Now," he said slowly, "I feel like I've found something worth staying for." Clara's breath caught. She didn't speak after that, not because she was uncomfortable, but because his words touched her in a place she thought was gone forever. She closed her eyes, letting his presence wrap around her like the blanket he had tucked around her shoulders. She fell asleep peacefully, just as she had the night before. But this time, she wasn't clinging to safety. She was resting in trust. Samuel stayed awake again for a while, watching the fire and thinking about the strange, unexpected path that had brought him here. He had wandered from ranch to ranch for years, never feeling truly home. But something about this place, about Clara, felt different. It felt like an answer to a question he didn't know he had been asking. When he finally closed his eyes, he did so with a small, quiet smile. Morning came softly again. Clara woke first this time. She found herself still leaning gently against Samuel's arm. She slowly lifted her head and looked at him. His face was calm in sleep, peaceful in a way she had never seen before. She stood quietly and placed another log in the fireplace, wanting to warm the room before he woke. When she turned around, she saw him opening his eyes. "Morning," he said, stretching lightly. "Did you sleep?" she asked. "A little," he said with a smile. "Better than most nights." She poured him a cup of warm tea and brought it over. This time, she didn't drop it. He took the cup from her and gave her a grateful look. "You're getting better," he said. "I feel better," she replied. They ate breakfast together, and afterward Samuel stepped outside to take care of the morning chores. Clara followed him to the porch, watching him work with calm, steady movements. The world looked brighter this morning. The fields glowed under the early sun, and the wind that once frightened her now felt gentle. When Samuel finished his chores, he came back to the porch where Clara stood. "Clara," he said softly, "I need to ask you something." She turned to him. "What is it?" He took a slow breath. I know this is sudden. I know you've been through more pain than most people face in a lifetime. But I want to be honest with you. Her heart began to beat faster. Go on. These last 2 nights, he said, they weren't just about helping you. They meant something to me too. I saw your strength, your kindness, your courage, and I don't want to walk away from that. Clara looked down at her hands, her voice trembling. Samuel, I'm not sure I'm ready for anything new. My heart still feels... I'm not asking for anything you're not ready for, he said gently. I'm asking if I can stay. Not as a visitor, not as a passing worker, but as someone who cares for you, truly cares. Clara felt a warmth spreading through her chest, a feeling she hadn't felt in years. She looked up at him slowly. Do you really mean that? She whispered. I do. The wind brushed past them softly, as if urging her to answer. Clara took a slow breath. Samuel, I don't know everything yet. I don't know how to heal fast, but I do know this. I don't want to face the nights alone anymore, and I don't want to lose you. Samuel stepped one small step closer, not touching her, just standing nearer so she could feel the sincerity in his presence. You won't lose me, he said softly. She smiled, a smile full of fragile hope and new courage. Then stay, she whispered. Stay today. Stay tomorrow. Stay as long as your heart tells you to. A quiet emotion filled Samuel's chest. He nodded, his voice warm. I'll stay. Clara felt something deep inside her finally settle. For the first time since her husband passed away, she felt the world open again, not in pain, but in possibility. Together, they stepped off the porch and walked toward the fields. The sun rose higher, lighting the land that once felt empty. Now it looked alive again, full of hope and second chances. And as Samuel walked beside her, Clara felt a simple truth settle quietly in her heart. She was no longer a lonely widow, and he was no longer a wandering cowboy. Their lives, once filled with loss, had gently found each other. 2 hearts discovering safety, trust, and the beginning of something that felt like home.